Hey, everybody, and welcome to AQ's Blog and Grill. Today, we're pleased and excited to have Mr. Jay Baer with us. Jay is the president of Convince and Convert, which is an online customer service and digital marketing consultancy and media company. He's the author now of 6 books. His latest one is Talk Triggers and came out just last year. I think that Jay, I used to say this about Gary Vaynerchuk, and then I kind of jazzed it up for what's his name, Brian. He's always talking about stuff. What's Fanzo? Brian Fanzo. I used to say to Brian, you're the second hardest working man in social media. But you know what, Jay? You know what, Jay Baer? You are the hardest working man.
Thank you.
In social media. Because you're really doing great stuff. And
thank you. It is 100% not true, but I appreciate that. I will say I have the hardest working team in social media. That is for sure. We have an unbelievable crew who really truly do all the hard work. I just take all the credit.
Well, and you just got some more, so pass it on to them if you like.
Thank you. I sure will.
Now, the other thing that's famous about young Jay here is he's the subject of a conspiracy theory. It's about the plaid lobby. They're very big in Washington D.C. now. And they've kind of chosen Jay to be their spokesperson.
Yes.
He's out there. He's wearing the plaid. He's extolling the virtue of plaid as being his favorite color. You can go on his website. And you can book Jay as a keynote speaker, and he is very, very busy at that. And you can pick his suit based right from the website. Which color plaid would you like Jay to wear? If you choose not to have him wear plaid, he will not come to your event.
That's almost literally true. I have not worn plaid on stage. It's been at least 4 or 5 years.
I was thinking 5.
So it's been a long time, and I love it. And I actually, it's to the point I don't really have any sport coats or suits that aren't plaid, so it makes it an easy choice for me. But it's funny you say that when people get to pick the suit. I was just at an event yesterday, and they picked out a dark blue and red plaid, which was nice, and that's one of my favorites actually. But sometimes they pick a plaid color that matches their logo for the event or what have you.
Sure.
And then sometimes that all goes terribly awry. 2 weeks ago, I was at an event in Mexico, and they picked a brown and blue plaid suit that I have. Turns out the stage was in front of some very large, like double doors, wooden doors, and which were the exact same color brown as the suit. So it was just like a floating head doing a keynote. I was fully camouflaged, and I thought, well, this has gone off the rails.
Very well, but you know what? I believe in Jay, and I believe that you carried it off anyway.
It was definitely new material for the opening, that's for sure.
Well, in tribute to Jay, I am wearing my plaid jacket.
I see that is like a smoking jacket. That's like unbelievable. Yes, I love the lapels. Very nice.
Thank you. I have a part-time gig at a parking lot, and I'm a valet. The tips are great. It's just up here in Canada. It gets a little chilly out there.
Yeah.
But I'm really good in the spring and summer.
It's spectacular. I love it.
So in doing my research for today, I thought, well, okay, this conspiracy theory about the deep plaid state and whatever it has been circulating. And I think mostly it's coming from Anne Handley. I'm not sure, but you know what she's like.
Yeah, she leads the floral state. It's a different warring faction. Yeah,
the big patterned jumpsuit.
Yes. Big flower is something to watch for.
That says something completely different about the social media. But in doing my research, I found out that no less a luminary than Albert Einstein had an opinion on plaid, and I want to share that with you. Albert said, once you can accept the universe as matter expanding into nothing, that is something wearing stripes with plaid comes easy.
Wow, I did not know that, but I love it. I feel like that should
Yeah,
be in my bio now. Thank you.
I will
I'm
send
gonna.
that to you because
That's very kind of you. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
the whole imagery behind the new J.
If it's good enough for Albert, it's good enough for me.
I know, I know. He was a trendsetter in many ways. I understand he was also a scientist of some sort. Who knows? Okay,
Secondarily.
secondarily. So, in your bio, by the way,
Mm.
it says that you're a seventh generation entrepreneur.
Yes.
Yeah. Can you unpack that for us? How the heck are you a seventh
Sure.
generation?
When my family on my dad's side showed up on these North American shores
Hmm.
in the very early 1800s,
Mm.
they began a business, a manufacturing business. They created caskets. They're in the casket making business,
Wow.
which is recession proof.
Mhm.
Yes, and so they began a casket making business, and that got passed down for a couple of generations, and that sort of faded away. Then they opened a furniture manufacturing business and a
Sure.
furniture
Yep.
retail business, and then my
Mhm.
grandfather had a whole series of entrepreneurial ventures, and my father started 5 or 6 companies in a variety of different categories.
Mhm.
And so when I was a young man, I don't remember literally ever having a conversation about entrepreneurship with
Right.
my father or grandfather.
Mm.
It was just always in the air. It was just sort of
Right.
assumed, right? It was like, well, yeah, of
Yep.
course, eventually you go do your own thing. It was never like, okay, let me sit down and tell you how we do things here in the Baer household. There was never that talk, right?
Mhm.
It just that just kind of how you thought about the world. And my son
Yeah.
actually started his own fashion label when he was still in high school. So
Wow.
he is now officially an eighth generation entrepreneur.
Isn't that something? And your daughter's now in Paris, so who knows what's happening across the pond there?
She has
Talk about
decided that
fashion.
she wants to go to law school. She says so.
Oh, that's a
So
shame.
we'll
I'm
see.
sorry.
I know, but interesting. She what she wants to do. I think you'll find this interesting, Alan.
Mhm.
She is an advertising major with an emphasis in social media,
Oh
which
boy.
is
Yeah.
probably doesn't come as a huge surprise.
Mhm.
And has done a lot of great work for us and a number of other brands already at her tender age.
Mhm.
But she wants to go to law school and become an influencer marketing attorney and
Oh boy.
really help figure out the legality, both on the brand side and the influencer side of all that. Because as you well know, it's very messy
Mhm.
at present and lots of well, let's just kind of make this up until someone catches us. And
Mhm.
so there definitely will be a place in the world for an influencer marketing attorney
Sure.
very quickly. And so she figures that might as well be me.
Yeah. Very good. Well, it's a wild, wild west show out there right now, isn't it?
Oh,
In
it's
terms of
crazy. It is
yeah,
absolutely crazy.
yeah. Okay.
And
And
it's
then we
real
get
money, right? It's
oh.
it isn't just well, here's some experimental dollars. I mean, there's a lot of brands, especially on
Mhm.
the certainly on the DTC side, but even on the retail and e-commerce side, especially on the
Mhm.
fashion in the fashion
Sure.
category.
Yeah.
You look at brands like Revlon, L'Oreal, et cetera, Clinique, large, multinational billion-dollar companies
Mhm.
who are spending not just a little bit of money on influencer marketing, but a preponderance of their total marketing budget.
Yeah.
You're talking about spending tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars on marketing promotions on something that is theoretically regulated, at
Mhm.
least here in the States, but
Mhm.
as a practical matter, not so much. So it
Right.
is it's fascinating.
Yeah. So this kind of goes into the thesis of talk triggers, I
Yeah,
think, in
yeah,
terms of word of mouth marketing, or in this case, word of modem.
yes.
Um, in terms of word of
Yeah,
mouth,
you're gonna have to define that for some for some people tuning in. Like,
yes.
go to the glossary. Like, what's a modem?
It's okay. Let's say word of mouse. Then
Yeah,
let's
there you
go
go.
with that.
There, nice. I
There you
like
go.
that.
Yeah. Well, I'm in the business. Um,
Word of trackpad. Yeah.
so the predominance now of almost a fad to go
Mhm,
into connecting to influencers. How is
mhm.
this then connected to talk triggers?
Well, as you say, it's very neatly aligned in this respect,
Hmm.
Alan. The best way to grow any business
Any business.
is is for your customers to do it for you.
Yeah.
One of my favorite quotes in business is not from Albert Einstein, and I apologize for that. It's from Robert Stevens, who is the founder of Geek Squad, which is the
Ah, yes.
services arm of Best Buy.
Yeah.
And Robert once said that advertising is a tax paid
Mm.
by the unremarkable. And there is a time and a place for advertising.
Mhm.
But he is correct in that many of the most successful brands in the world advertise the least because
Mhm.
their customers do that job for them.
Right.
And influencer marketing, I think, is sort of a half step beyond that, right? It is not it is not purely volunteer marketing
Mhm.
because obviously there's a transfer of goods or payments, but the idea that real people will listen to real people and
Mhm.
make buying decisions accordingly is manifestly true and has been proven over and over and over and over. In fact, the research that we did for the book Talk Triggers indicates that some 50% of all purchases are influenced by word of mouth,
Mm.
and more than 90% of B2B purchases are
Yes.
influenced by word of mouth.
Right.
And the younger you are, the more word of mouth impacts your purchases.
Mhm.
And the larger the purchase, the more you listen to word of mouth before making that purchase. And so when I talk to business people, and I do that all the time, of course, about this topic, they always agree and concur that word of mouth is important to their own business. I have
Mm.
been doing this for a while now, and nobody's ever said, "Nah, Jay, we don't really care about word of mouth. It's not part of our success formula." Like nobody ever says that. Like
Mm.
we all know that it's important, but we don't know just how important it is because one of the most frustrating things that I can fathom, and frankly, the reason why we wrote this book, Alan,
Mm.
is that despite how important word of mouth is, fewer than 1% of companies have an actual word of mouth strategy.
Mm.
We just take it for granted. We just assume that if we run a decent business, customers will notice it and talk about it. But that's
Mhm.
not actually the way human beings behave,
Right.
right? I don't know everybody tuning in, but I know some of you, I'm certain. But I know this for sure. Nobody has ever said, Alan, let me tell you about this experience I had. It was perfectly adequate. Right? Nobody ever says that because that's a terrible story to tell and a terrible story to listen to, right? There's not a story. Nobody
Mhm.
ever says, "Hey, so I went in the corner, right? And I flicked that switch and the lights came on," right? That's
Woo!
not a story. Like you don't
Right.
get conversational credit for doing exactly what people paid you to do. And
Mhm.
that's the big mistake that businesses have been making now for centuries, perhaps,
Yeah.
which is this mistaken belief that competency creates conversation, and
Yeah.
it doesn't. So the whole idea of a talk trigger is it is an operational choice that you make in your business that is
Mhm.
designed to create conversations. And
Mhm.
as you mentioned in the introduction, for me on the speaking side of our business, when you hire me to give a keynote, you get to pick out what suit I wear. That creates tremendous amounts of conversations
Sure.
amongst meeting planners and audiences, and kind of takes on a life of its own. That's
Mhm.
not an accident, right? I didn't spin the wheel of promotions. That is a very intentional operational customer experience choice that I have made, and
Mhm.
it is only designed to create conversations, and every business can, and I submit to you, should have a talk trigger of their own.
Right. So one of the talk triggers you talk about in the book, of course, is the chocolate chip cookies at
Yes,
DoubleTree.
DoubleTree. Mhm.
So explain a little bit to us why that plate of cookies is so important.
Yeah, well, number 1, it's not a plate of cookies, which is why it works so well.
Ah.
So DoubleTree Hotels by Hilton, it's one of their, kind of upper middle level brands. There's, I don't
Mhm.
know, 15 or 20 Hilton brands now, I don't remember exactly. And DoubleTree has famously given each guest upon check-in a warm chocolate chip cookie, and this
Right.
happens all over the world. There's only a handful of DoubleTrees in Canada. There's a couple in Toronto. There's a few in
Mhm.
Australia, but mostly in the U.S.
Yep.
And they've been doing this every day for 30 years. 30 years. So people think, well, geez, how long is my talk trigger going to be able to last? Well, theoretically, indefinitely.
Sure.
Um, so today and tomorrow and the next day, they will distribute, Alan, some 75,000 chocolate chip cookies a day,
Yeah, great.
which is a lot of cookies.
Right.
So my co-author Daniel Lemon and I did a whole research project on this because we wanted to understand what is truly the impact of this kind of talk trigger.
Mhm.
Obviously, it's not an accident to give away these cookies. It is, in fact, an operational choice. And it turns out there's a bunch of different ways we looked at the data, but the stat that I think explains it most concisely is that overall, 34% of DoubleTree's customers have told a story
Mm,
about that chocolate chip cookie. So
mhm,
what that means is that today, tomorrow, the day after that, 22,500 stories a day
mhm. Right.
about a chocolate chip cookie. Now, companion question. When's the last time you saw a DoubleTree ad? Like, kind of maybe never, because
Probably never.
they almost never advertise, because the cookie is the ad and the guests are the volunteer sales and marketing
Yeah. Mhm.
department.
Sure.
So it can be uh, it can be the propellant of your brand. You just have to do it well, and one of the
Yeah.
reasons they do it well is it makes sense in the context of their brand.
Mhm.
So their brand positioning, according to their CMO, is the warm welcome. The warm welcome.
Yes. Yep.
So they want to be disproportionately good at that, I don't know, whatever, 6, 8 minutes, 10 minutes between when you set foot in the hotel and when you set foot in your room.
Yeah.
That little gap of time, they wanna be really good at that. So
Mhm.
they put more time, money, effort in lobby design than most hotels at that price point, right? It's not
Right.
the Ritz-Carlton.
Yep.
And they put more time, money, effort in front desk clerk training than most
Yes.
hotels at that price point. And the cookie ceremony is a big part of that because it is a ceremony.
Yeah.
They have an oven in each hotel, an oven. And
Mhm.
so the desk clerk turns and goes to the oven, grabs a very warm, borderline hot cookie, puts it in a paper sleeve, and then hands it to you. The hand-to-hand pass
Ah.
is brand standard. And so not only do you feel the warmth of the cookie, you smell it, it's tactile, they look you right in the eye
Mhm.
when they give it to you. And this is why it's so important. Everybody tuning in has been to a hotel at some point in your career
Mhm.
where they had a basket of apples at reception,
Right.
or a pile of bananas outside the elevators on your floor. Yes?
Yeah. Mhm. Yes.
Raise your hand, and I'm watching all of you. Raise your hand if you've ever told anybody a story about that. Never, ever, ever. It's a waste of good citrus.
Gotcha.
The difference is the cookie is an experience.
Right.
The citrus is a pile. Yeah, and almost all good talk triggers are some kind of an experience, not just a bullet point. That's why, and going back to my own example,
Mhm.
for many years, I wore the plaid suits, right? I was always the plaid suit guy, but
Mhm.
it didn't really create the kind of conversational impact that I wanted until we made it an experience, until we allowed meeting planners to pick the suit. That
Uh-huh.
was the subtle but incredibly important shift to
Mhm.
go from a product attribute, guy wears plaid, to a
Right.
talk trigger, I'm now part of it.
Yeah. Fabulous. So indeed, word of mouth in the DoubleTree case could be word of mouth watering.
Yeah, so well done. Yes, indeed. And they
Well,
are good cookies. For
yeah.
those of you who have been down that road, they are good cookies. And I would argue the best cookie I've ever been given for free by a hotel. I think
Yes.
I can safely say that.
That's unique.
There are those who say best cookie in the world. I think that's overstating the case slightly,
Mhm. Yeah.
but they are noticeably terrific.
There you go. So, Jay, who is this Daniel Lemon fellow? Who's this co-author on Talk Triggers?
Daniel Lemon is an absolute genius, and formerly was the head of strategy at my firm Convince and Convert.
Hmm.
Also is the author of a book called Manipulated,
Oh,
all about ratings and reviews and how that business kind of works on the inside. It's a
okay.
terrific book,
Mhm.
really
Okay.
practical and smart about how to handle online ratings and reviews. He was formerly a communications executive for Google, and also a high level public relations executive in Los Angeles and San Francisco. And he and I have been friends for a long time. He was a client in the very early days of Convince and Convert, and he ended up
Mhm.
going out on his own, and then became part of our organization. And now, in addition to his own work as a speaker and as an author, has a startup technology company in Southern California in the food category. Helps
Oh, boy.
people with food allergies and things along those lines.
I think, with that reference, he might be a darn good guest on AQ's blog and
Oh,
group.
he'd be fantastic. Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
fantastic.
So in the book, you and Dan talk about 5 types of talk triggers.
Mhm.
Um, what can you explain to us what a couple of
Yeah.
those might be?
Yeah, the thing about talk triggers is once you understand how important it is, you'll be, yeah, we need to get us one of those.
Mm,
And but it's helpful to understand that there are different types, and there are different types of talk triggers that work better for different organizations, just sort of based
mm,
on what you sell and to whom you sell it, and
sure.
and 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 sort of your culture and your operations, etc. So
Mhm,
the first one is talkable generosity, and this is when you're just more generous than your customers expect you to be.
mm,
Free cookie is an example of
yeah.
talkable generosity. Of course,
Mhm,
talkable generosity is the one, Alan, that you will see most often in the wild. Um, it's also the easiest, typically, to conceptualize and implement in most companies
mhm.
because
Okay.
we give the customer X, we're going to give them X plus Y, right? And
Mhm,
usually, in terms of planning that out, that's not a giant leap of faith for folks. So
mm,
it's the most common, the one you'll see the most, typically the easiest, but is by no means the only way to do it, nor is it necessarily the most effective way to do it. It's just the most obvious way to do it. Okay.
right. Gotcha. Mhm,
Second option is talkable speed. This is when you are, of course, just faster than customers expect you to be.
mhm,
This one can be incredibly effective. I will say that talkable speed is the hardest one to do, because customer expectations for speed are not static, and they continue to ratchet up. So
right.
what was fast 2 years ago is average today,
Yeah.
et cetera, et cetera. But it can be really great. There's an example that you probably don't know. It's not in the book, from a accounting firm in Indianapolis,
Mm,
not too far from my house. Small accounting firm. It's called Bognatoff and Dodges. Two-man firm, associate, front desk person. So there's four of them together. They are exactly the same as approximately 11,000 other small accounting firms in the US.
mhm,
No difference in services, no difference in price. They're an accounting firm.
mhm.
But they're an accounting firm with a talk trigger, which is that they respond to every client via phone or email at all times within 5 minutes.
Ah, okay.
And they are not my accounting firm, but if they were my accounting firm, and they responded to me within 5 minutes, would I tell other people that story? Absolutely. In fact, I'm telling you the story right now, and they're not my accountants. Uh,
Bingo.
yeah, because my accountant does not respond to me within 5 minutes. I can tell you
Uh-oh.
that for sure. Uh, but perhaps they should. And so talkable speed can be really, really effective.
Mhm,
It's one that can be a little tricky to implement and stick to, but it can be great. Third one is talkable usefulness, which is the most similar to my book Utility,
mhm,
that I know you're familiar with. This idea that you're just more useful and typically more informational. Thank you, than your customers expect. That can be a great one. You have talkable empathy, which is one of my personal favorites,
mhm.
and actually one that would not have been in the list, say, I don't know, 3 4 years ago, maybe we
Yeah.
we wouldn't have even included it because it wasn't that long ago that treating customers and ourselves, each other,
Mhm,
with kindness and compassion and dignity and empathy, it wasn't worthy of recognition, right? It was just, we just called
mhm.
that business, right?
Right.
But somewhere along the way, we kinda lost our way, and now we are living in an era of empathy deficit, I think it's safe to say,
Safe to say.
and consequently, I mean, that makes me sad as a human being.
Mhm.
Uh, but as a business consultant, I will tell you it's a tremendous opportunity for us all, because now when you do treat customers with kindness and compassion and warmth and dignity and humanity and empathy, it actually stands out like never before. And you get conversational credit for it
Mm,
in a way that you never would have previously.
right.
So just being incredibly good at empathy and customer service can be a word of mouth fire starter, and is certainly one to consider.
Mhm.
That one can be a little tricky because it can't be circumstantial, right? It has to be the way you do business,
Right.
and from an operations and training standpoint, that can be a little tricky. But companies that do it well, you may be familiar with the e-commerce company Chewy.com. Do you know those guys? They're a
Yes.
pet.
Yes.
So
Yes.
so they are talkably empathetic, right?
Yes,
They
they
are
are.
incredible and extraordinary at how they handle their customers in
Mhm.
good times and in bad. It truly is their conversational calling card,
Mhm.
is their humanity, and so
Yes.
it can work and be amazing.
Mhm.
Um, the fifth one is talkable attitude, and my plaid suit example is talkable attitude, right? It's when you do something just a little bit bold, a little bit unusual, a little bit zany,
Mhm.
a little bit funky that customers will remember. The key to talkable attitude as a talk trigger, though, Alan, is that the clothes have to fit. So it has to make sense in the context of your brand and sort of your approach to the world.
Mhm.
It's one that can feel very artificial if
Right.
it's not in the spirit of the organization, right?
Yeah.
So, I wouldn't expect, MasterCard, right, to to embrace a talkable attitude approach, right? Because you don't think of MasterCard as an irreverent, or zany or funny
They're not
brand,
fun
and if they
guys.
yeah, and if they went that route, you'd be like, I don't know, man,
Yeah. Mhm.
that didn't quite add up in my mind.
Mhm.
And so the thing about talkable attitude is if you do it, it can be great, but it has to really make sense to your customers and more importantly to your team.
To your team, I mean that authenticity. When they're out on the front lines, they've got to feel comfortable in that. If
Yeah.
they're faking it, they know it. The customer will know it, and that's when the story will come out is not very credible or favorable. Uh, your conversational credit would be become a debit, I think, if that was the case.
Yes, well said.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes,
Okay.
or at least just wouldn't go anywhere, whereas nobody would talk about it because they wouldn't believe it, right?
Mhm.
And there's a lot of ways that we mess this up when we do talk triggers, right? Where we think we've got it, and then the conversational credit doesn't accrue. One of the ways that happens is when we try and make it too big, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Marketers are guilty of saying, well, we want to get people to talk about us. So what we're going to do is come up with this giant special offer. We're going to shock and awe them into talking about us, right? And so, put your name in a fishbowl, and one of you is going to win a Caribbean island, and you're like, wait, what? Like
What?
that doesn't that can't be true.
That's
And what we find in the research is that when you offer experiences that are too big,
right. Mhm.
it doesn't create conversations.
Mhm.
It creates suspicion.
Right.
And nobody wants to tell a story to their friend that they think may not be accurate or true.
Mhm.
And so what you're looking for is sort of a Goldilocks customer experience attribute, something that is different enough to be talkable,
Mhm.
but not so big that it becomes untrustworthy.
Yes. As we're chatting and we're talking about organizations finding or creating the talk triggers.
Yeah.
The ROI on that is it could be the acronym could stand for return on intention. Whatever you do to create this talk trigger has got to do something to
Mhm.
create that story. And that story then has got to do something to build your business or build
Mhm.
the relationship. If you don't do that, then you're just talking about yourself, likely, and no one's going to listen.
It just becomes a public relations initiative,
Thank you.
which isn't the value of zero, but it's not the
Mhm.
same as really being a business development propellant. I mean, the idea here ultimately is that your current customers recruit the next generation of customers on your behalf,
Right.
and they use your talk trigger as the conversational entree to do so.
Indeed. Okay, I get it.
Right?
So,
That's really the whole premise here, right? Is that
yeah.
and so what's the ROI on that? Well, number one, it's increased growth velocity, and number two, it's reduction in advertising and marketing expenditures.
Hmm. Yeah, and not only that, I think Jay is it's reducing cost, but it's increasing investment potential. I mean,
Mhm.
these talk triggers will create more margin, which is what business is trying to do, than just throwing ads out there and hoping for the best. That you're going to get a better return on your dough. I guess is what I'm saying. So here we've got our friend Jay, or at least Guy Kawasaki.
Mhm.
um, he's talking a lot, and he's got the experience of being a brand evangelist, and he's doing it now for Canva,
Mhm.
uh, and he's an influencer for Mercedes Benz, etc. Now, what is the difference? Is there any between how Kawasaki is explaining evangelism to what you're proposing with Talk Triggers to be a brand advocate? Is there some difference there that we can see?
Yes, in this regard,
Mhm.
Guy has been anointed with the scepter and the sash as sort of the tip of the spear for that brand, and I
Mhm.
think it's safe to say that Guy's experiences with Canva and Mercedes Benz are atypical from the experiences of other customers.
Mm.
So while his support can absolutely have an impact on customer attitudes and customer purchase behavior,
Mhm.
I would argue that you also need, and in fact, it's more important to have a talk trigger that is experienced by the preponderance of customers.
Mhm.
Because when you think about word of mouth, the power is in the numbers, right? It's
Mhm.
not about one person, Guy,
Mm.
telling the story.
Mhm.
It's about all the customers telling the story, which is why one of the key attributes of a talk trigger, as we say in the book, is that it is repeatable. And when we say repeatable, what we mean is that your talk trigger, your operational choice that you make, designed to create conversations, isn't only for your best customers or your newest customers or your biggest customers or your anointed brand advocates. It is for
Mhm.
all customers. I was in Australia on Monday, last Monday, doing some speaking for Volkswagen. And there's a dealership there that has on the roof of their dealership a whole series of beehives. They have partnered with a local beekeeper
Sure.
who makes artisanal honey
Mhm.
there in Brisbane. And what they do to sort of tie this together, it's a terrific talk trigger, is when you bring your vehicle in for service, when you retrieve your vehicle after service, in the cup holder is a small jar of artisanal honey
Love it.
with a note tied around it. Says, "Hey, this hope you enjoy it. This honey is made from I forget his name, the artisanal bee man. And by the way, the bees are located right above where your
Mm.
car is right now. It's just something that we like to do here. Boom, boom, boom."
Yeah. Wow.
Everybody who brings their car in gets honey. It's not just if you've got a big expensive repair. It's not just if you're a new customer. It's not just if you're a longtime loyalist. It's everybody because again, if you're trying to get customers to tell your story to
Mhm.
other potential customers, you
Right.
want as many people telling that story as possible. Now, if you want to then augment this broad-based word of mouth program with a narrower, potentially more noticeable, if you will, to the masses influencer program
Mhm.
with somebody like Guy, fantastic. I'm all in on that, but I would not do the one without the other.
Right. Very good. So it's
That's why I look at it.
yeah, I get it, and that whole integration then makes a ton of sense, because
Well,
Guy does.
ideally what you do is one of Guy's assignments. So let's go. But let's say Canva's thing for whatever. This is a tortured analogy, but work with me. Let's say that for whatever reason, Canva's talk trigger was also jars of honey. That they're also an Australian company, but let's say they got bees on their roof, and somehow, even though it's a virtual company, they mail you honey if you sign up for an annual plan with Canva.
Right.
What I would do is I would have one of Guy's assignments,
Mhm.
right, to be every Friday. Here's Guy Kawasaki's new honey recipe.
There you go. Yeah.
right? And so it all kind of fits together hand in glove. You've
Mhm.
got the talk trigger that everybody has access to, right?
Mhm.
And then you spike that with sort of the influencer side of it.
Yeah. What's next for you, Jay? This book came out just around a year ago,
Yeah.
and you've done online seminars on it. You've had a course
Mhm.
on it. What's next for Jay Baer? Have you got a new idea in terms of a book or an approach?
Yeah, starting to noodle on it a little bit. As you may remember, all of my books start as speeches, right? So
Yes.
I come up with a premise and then I take it on the road for usually a year or so
Hmm.
and get it to the point where I feel like it's got a strong narrative and strong stories. And if the audience reacts to it positively, then I'll try and turn it into a book. So I'm just beginning that process now,
Okay.
and trying to probe on almost the opposite side of this question, which is the problem with customer experience as a discipline is that there really is no such thing as customer experience.
Hmm.
It is a nickname that we have concocted
Yes.
to to it's shorthand for the dozens or hundreds of individual moments and interactions that we have with customers. And so when you say to a business, improve or optimize your customer experience, like sure that makes good sense, but what do you mean specifically? So I'm trying to get people to sort of think small in that regard. And we're doing a bunch of research on this right now, Ellen, to determine of all the things that you could do in your business to keep your customers, to prevent defection,
Right.
to reduce churn, what things should you do? Where should you spend your time, money, and effort? Because you can't do everything. And this idea, I'm colloquially calling them cancel causes right now. Cancel causes, the things that are sort of the last straw for your customers, the things that make them seek your competitors or stop paying you. How,
Right.
how can you how can you ferret those out and address them proactively?
Right.
So that's kind of what the area that I'm exploring right now, and I'm working on a speech based on that. And if it goes well, then it'll be a book someday, maybe.
Yeah. Wow. Fabulous. If there are any listeners or subscribers that have not been to a conference that features Jay Baer, get yourself to one.
Thank you. And I'll tell you, I should have mentioned this earlier. So the book Talk Triggers has a talk trigger. It would be sort of hypocritical if I did not. Two actually. If you get the actual physical book as opposed to the audio book or the Kindle copy, it has alpacas on the cover, which is
Yes,
not
it
something
does.
that you typically see in a business book. So it's fairly noticeable on the shelf.
Yeah.
But more importantly, Alan, the talk trigger works like this. It is Talkable Generosity. If you buy the book Talk Triggers and you do not love it
Yeah.
unconditionally,
This is great.
uh,
Yep.
Daniel and I will buy you any other book of your choosing, and that is true. You want a first edition Bible? We'll round one up. We'll round one up somewhere.
Is it
So
signed?
far,
Is it autographed?
signed Bible by Luke, only Luke.
Yes.
The So far of the many thousands of books we have sold,
Mhm.
we have had two redemptions on that offer.
Oh my
A
goodness.
guy emails me and says, "Hey, I didn't like the book. There weren't enough case studies."
There's
And I thought,
25
well,
case studies in
I
there.
said, yeah, there's 25 case studies. So I'm like, I don't know exactly what you were thinking, but okay. And he wanted like $100 book on COBOL programming or something. I'm like, all right, fine. And then a few months later, I get another email from a guy who says, I didn't like the book. There are too many case studies. And I said, so I thought, okay, well, number one, you should meet this other guy. You guys should get together and kind of argue this out. And
Yeah.
number two, I said, this is the first time I've ever been criticized for having too much evidence in a business book. I'm like, yeah,
Oh
it's
boy.
too much proof in here. So you never know, but yes, we are delighted to make that offer. We will. So there's no risk to anybody out there for
There you
getting
go.
the book. And also, even if you want more proof, if you go to talktriggers.com,
Hmm.
there is a ton of free stuff there. So
Yes, there is.
discussion guides, research, infographics, videos, book report templates, like all
Hmm.
kinds of stuff. So knock yourselves out.
Yeah, and I'm going to mention this now in the close. In that, in doing my research, I've known Jay for 4 or 5 years, but still doing the research because you, our listeners, deserve that. I came across that offer, which I thought was just great. We'll give you any book that you want if you didn't like this one. I had not expected anyone to take you up on that offer, but those are two funny stories. But also to track down Jay and his websites, and I was on the Talk Triggers site this morning,
Oh,
and
thanks.
it's beautifully done. And
Thanks,
there
Daniel built it.
is that right? He did a great
Yeah,
job, and there's more
thanks.
stuff than you could ever use, which again goes to I'm going to tell stories about it. I will be telling people, hey, by the way, um, you really want the complete stuff plus the X factor? Go to this website, and my students are going to love it. And
Thanks. We
I
just
know I.
figure, look, yeah, we get paid if you buy a book. It's not
Mm,
much, but more importantly, it continues to frustrate Daniel and I how understudied and really underemphasized word of mouth continues to be.
mm,
And we really do want to change that. So
right,
it's absolutely our desire to really give away as much as we possibly can of this system, of the thinking behind it, because we desperately want people to actually use it. And I got to tell you, the most gratifying thing about this project, Alan,
mhm,
is that people who buy the book can email in to be part of the Facebook group. We have a Facebook group for
yes,
Hug Your Haters readers,
yes,
and we now have, I think it's 2,500 people in the group or something.
mhm,
A lot more readers than that, but 2,500 people want to be in the group, and every day they are coming up with new examples of talk triggers, and the group itself is criticizing them or saying, hey, here's a different way to do it better, and it's become a real community of people who are committed to building their businesses with word of mouth, and that is
excellent.
incredibly gratifying.
Yeah, well, good show, and thanks for being the hardest working guy in.
Now, hardest working credit taker for the best team in the business.
Well, okay. Well, thanks very much for being with us today, Jay.
My
And
pleasure.
it's always a pleasure. And you always share so much, and that's what makes you, as Kawasaki would say, you're a mensch for sharing as much as you
Thank you.
do with the generosity that you have. So,
Please send
thank
me that jacket.
it's in the mail. It'll
Thanks,
be in
buddy.
the mail today. Okay. See
Great
you
to
later.
be with you. See you
Thank
guys.
you. Bye.
AQ's Blog and Grill.